Okay, real quick, I wanted to, because I've had this posed to me in comments and in various places, so I want to just go ahead and sum this up. Guys, there's a big difference in what I would deem um, okay or good virtual learning options and what would a good virtual learning option look like as opposed to what a bad one would look like and everything in between. So what would a good one look like? Guys, I know school systems that are operating their virtual learning on a very concise schedule, multiple days a week. Some are doing 5 days a week, like a normal school schedule, to where a child will log on and have their login information and their Google Classroom. Schedule, curriculum, access to materials, all that stuff. Let's say starting at 8 o'clock, ending at 8:45, and then 10 minutes to then log into the next class as though they were transitioning, just like a normal school day. And they would do that, throughout the day. And I know a few schools that are doing that. And so that right there would be a model that would be, like I said, clear cut schedule, all the login information. Google Classroom is up and operating to where the lesson plan and notes and all of those things that would be in there for, let's say, a traditional school year where all those things are there. So the only difference is that instead of attending inside of the school, they're logging on, same class, students are there in the boxes, and attendance is being taken, all of those things. That would be what a virtual learning um, appropriate option would look like. Okay, now whether your child can do all of that, and because at the same time, how are they implementing your accommodations? Because even if you have an IEP, guys, I'm talking to 504 parents as well. You don't need a 504 if you have an IEP, because your 504 accommodations are embedded all over your IEP, especially on your supplemental aids and services section, your accommodations for testing section. All of those things are going to be noted in your IEP. Those of you who have children that have behavioral issues, that, let's say, their behavior impedes their learning and impacts the learning of others, how are they going to address those concerns with regards to this virtual learning environment? What about the fact that your child needs an aid for a redirection? That's not your responsibility. Okay? Now, I understand this whole thing with virtual learning. I get it. But guys, if parents wanted to homeschool, they'd homeschool. They send them to school because they can't. They don't feel comfortable, or they just financially can't do it because they have, let's say, a dual income or a single income with a single parent. And so to sit there and say, well, the child, but you also have the schools. Some of these schools are coming out and saying that the parents cannot participate. Let's say in a general education environment where, let's say, the child is receiving redirection or has redirection needs. So are they going to be sending an aid to the home? How are they going to be assisting so that your child can participate in the manner which the IEP dictates? Okay, because if they're not doing it, if they're not replicating the school setting like I told you, which is that virtual learning option, then how are they doing it? Because then they run the real risk of the child not being able to be provided a FAPE, because the accommodations aren't there, the behavioral supports aren't there. You know, now that's general education instruction. Let's get over to special education. So that should also, a good special education virtual learning would be preset schedule that is followed, where you have the login information, you have access to the Google Classroom, the lesson plan, the notes, all the expectations, and to where you have a predictable schedule for your child to participate. And at that point, What is your child supposed to be working on? Are they working on, let's say, small group or individual reading? Are they working on small group individual math? Those are typically going to be the two biggest areas where your child is receiving specialized instruction. What are they working on? Because you should know that. Uh, if your child's just logging on and sitting there, then no, that's not beneficial. Okay. Also, when your child's in a special education environment, do they require additional supports for, let's say, attentiveness, redirection, those kind of organization? What kind of accommodations they need for testing? How are they proposing to provide all of that? Those things should have already been mapped out. If you're doing virtual learning, that should already been known. You should already know those answers. You should already know those answers. If you don't know those answers, then you don't have a good virtual option. And the school's trying to wing it. Okay? And that's real risky for a school system to be winging it. Now, that's for the special education. Well, let's say if your child requires speech language, OT, physical therapy, well, where are they putting those? Once again, here we go. You need an identifiable, consistent schedule so that the parent can predict it, the parent can put it in a calendar, the parent can assist with the login. If it's being provided in that manner. And I don't even know whether or not some of this stuff is feasibly done appropriately in these kind of virtual settings. Some of our children absolutely require direct one-to-one kind of intervention, especially when it comes to physical therapy and occupational therapy. So I really don't understand how they're providing those things. And if your IEP says that it needs to be provided direct, then how is that being? Then how are they making that to where it's appropriate? And okay, so what's a bad option? And this is what I'm starting to get information from parents. It's the same crap as happened in the spring. To where they send worksheets home. They want the parent to help the child fill out the worksheet, and the special education teacher, for example, will be available if the parent needs it. I have many parents that they haven't yet received login information. They don't have a set schedule for participating. And I'm talking about already being 1 or 2 weeks in to the new school year, and they don't have any of this stuff yet. Where I'm really seeing a disaster is the more the child requires with regards to special education services, the bigger the disaster. Now, why is that? Because we already know. The school already knows that these children are not distant learners. They already know that they're not virtual learners. What do? Guys, you got to assert your rights. You got to send an email. You got to fire the first shot. And I'm not going to say that you're the first shot. But what I'm saying, because they already fired it when they went virtual only and didn't give any kind of alternative or consideration or individualized consideration for what your child requires, and working within those preferences. They made these decisions for administrative convenience. And I don't care whether they think they're following some health guidelines, or whether they're acquiescing to the union, which many schools are, and the unions are fighting for their employees, which are the teachers. I don't fault that. That's what unions do, okay? I disagree with unions in any kind of government workplace that are supported by the people's taxes. But that's me. I've been complaining about that for years. So, the fact that we have COVID, doesn't really bother me. I am absolutely not shocked that the unions are backing their members, and their members are the teachers. That's not the kids. They can sit there and give me some song and dance that they're doing this for children, but that's just absolute BS. Okay? I could go into another 10-minute discourse about how that is a fallacy to believe that the union is there for the kids. They're not. They're there to protect their members, and their members are teachers. So, with that being said, you can tell based upon how I described this and this and this, whether or not you are receiving a good virtual option. If you're not, then guys, I don't know what you're waiting for to complain about it. And you need to start creating a paper trail through your email. And that paper trail involves including your special education director, your case manager for your child, and if your child attends general education classes, then you need to include your school principal, okay? And you need to sit there and lay out what the problems are. You need to lay out what is not being provided, and you need to be very concise about it, because all of this is evidence. This is evidence of what hasn't been done and what hasn't been provided. Because you're going to have your statute of limitations, you're going to have all of that to be able to sit there and say, look, you guys owe my child. Hell, they owe your child, quite frankly, for the disaster and the debacle of the spring, okay? The fact that they could have done updated testing, they could have provided services if they wanted to really think outside the box and be attentive to the needs of our kids. They could have done that in the summer. But very few schools did that, okay? And they just have continued to let this ride. You got to assert yourself. But you got to start creating a paper trail and not just complain to me. You also need to sit there and complain to me while you're also asserting the rights of your child through email to the right people within your district that make these decisions. The special education director or the 504 coordinator, if your child has a 504. But if it's an IEP, special education director, the school principal, and your child's case manager. Those are the three people, okay? The buck stops with the special education director, though, not the principal. Special education director, okay? And if you're not receiving any satisfaction, if things are not working, I wouldn't sit there and wait for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, guys. Many of this stuff many of these schools are going to, let's say, resume, at least in Alabama. I mean, in New Mexico, it's such a haphazard mess, for example, because Albuquerque, which is the largest school system in the state, that serves 95,000 students, a quarter, I believe it's a quarter of the student population in the entire state. They're not even going back till January. Santa Fe, same thing. And I believe, from what I'm understanding, is that those are mainly due to deals made with the unions as to why they're not serving the kids in any other format. And so there's problems there. But some of these Alabama school districts, for example, and I believe it would probably apply to Texas and Tennessee and Georgia, where we also practice, that they'll push you, they'll delay it, they'll give you lip service, just hoping that they can get to that finish line of 9 weeks and then start back of in-school services, and then hope that you just forget about March to October and just sort of play along with them and go, well, I don't want to be that parent, and I don't want to be, I don't want to have a bad relationship with guys. That's not how due process works. And I know so many of you are concerned and scared that that's how it would come across, and that it would create a bad relationship with your school system. And that isn't the case. This entire process is there for you to assert the rights of your child, and your school is very, very familiar, and this is a normal process for them. You may not think that due processes go on in your school or mediation, but they're far more frequent than you would know. And so therefore your director doesn't get all discombobulated. Most of them. Some of them take this stuff way too personally, and they shouldn't. All right, but in this situation, a lot of them, believe me, are fully aware about what's going on, and a lot of them are victims as well of decisions that are being made far above them. but they understand that they're going to have to fix these problems. Well, they're not going to fix these problems unless you assert that there is a problem. And they're not going to just sit there and volunteer all this stuff, guys. That there's way too many kids out there. So they're going to give the grease to the squeaky wheels. Are you a squeaky wheel? You're not a squeaky wheel. And that's a decision you've got to make. But I'm also telling you, you need to create a paper trail. And you need to start asserting those things by drafting those emails like I had stated. And, you gotta stand up and you gotta fight for your kid.